Speaking of Las Vegas, time is running out to sign up for the Westgate Super Contest, the Circa Million, the Golden Nugget Ultimate Football Challenge, the William Hill Pick'em, anything else that's going on out there in Sin City. If you live outside of the state of Nevada, you have to have a proxy to join those contests. You can still be in them, but you have to have a proxy to submit your picks for you. Maddie and Tony over at footballcontest.com have done a phenomenal job for us over the last 5-6 years, however long it's been that we've been in the Super Contest, and they will do a great job for you as well. We're going with them again this year. Great to catch up with them a couple weeks ago, but make sure that if you're getting involved in any of those contests out in Las Vegas, Maddie and Tony over at footballcontest.com are our preferred proxy service here on Bang the Book Radio. We got one more guest for this Tuesday edition of the show. That is professional handicapper Rolf Michaels from wagertalk.com. Rolf, how's it going today, man?
Adam, going great. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me here once again. And let's go ahead and start with some college football. We just finished up with the NFL with Brian. We'll get back to that here at the tail end of this segment with Rolf. But Rolf, week one, observations, thoughts, concerns, questions. What did you see?
Well, a couple of the biggest thoughts. Obviously, we had, so far this season, we've had 6 teams getting upset as double-digit favorites. They, of course, were Tennessee against Georgia State, Missouri and Wyoming, South Carolina, North Carolina, Purdue, Nevada, Western Kentucky and Central Arkansas, and Arizona and Hawaii. The next thing that caught my eye is there were 4 true freshmen that started this week. Well, those 4 true freshmen went 4-0 straight up and basically 4-0 against the spread. Boise's Hank Brockmeyer, Auburn's Bo Nix, North Carolina's Sam Howell, and while Arizona State, Jaden Daniels, they didn't get the cover, Kent State scored late. They won and controlled that game. So certainly impressive when, I think we've seen the turn of the page with Lawrence and then what Tua did. Listen, just like these freshmen in basketball that start AAU camps at a crazy young age, these quarterbacks now that grow up to be quarterbacks in their peewee leagues start having trainers at a young age. They are now taught to do things the right way through high school. They have professional people teaching them to take the right steps, and we'll see a change now. I mean, Ohio State played 7 true freshmen. I think Bama played 6 or 7 true freshmen. That's never happened in the past. We've seen now these teams know they're going to lose those players in a few years. They're going to graduate early, most likely. You might as well play them now.
Now, something else that kind of stood out to me here, and I know that some of our friends and some people that we know in the industry did get off to a slow start last week. A lot of games that had sharp line movement went the other way. East Carolina took some money early on. They got blown out by North Carolina State. The Ole Miss-Memphis game, the books got middled on that one. That one came down from 6 to as low as 3.5, back up to 4.5. So, again, the importance of getting the right number there. South Carolina took money. They lost. Virginia Tech took money through a couple of key numbers, 3 and 4. Lost that game outright, although they were -4 in turnover margin. We saw several games where the lines got bet up. USC, another one against Fresno State. The lines took sharp action, and the game went the other way. So what do you make of that?
Well, I have a reason for that, and part of it is, a couple of those, you talk North Carolina, South Carolina, that was a freshman quarterback, Sam Howell for North Carolina. I know a lot of people were on Florida State over Boise. Well, you know what? Color me wrong. I was one of those people that was on Florida State and said, well, Boise's got to travel to Florida State. You have the heat and humidity, and now they're playing the game at noon. That's another advantage, and they have a true freshman. Well, guess what? Totally wrong. Boise State was the better team on the field. They were better conditioned. Just crazy that they would run 108 plays on Florida State and come out relaxed. But the thing that caught me by real surprise was this. There were 11 teams this year in college football that returned 17 or more starters. Those teams went 4-6 straight up, 4-5-1 against the spread. There were 13 teams this year that returned 9 or fewer starters. Those teams that returned 9 or fewer starters went 9-4 straight up, 9-4 against the spread. So I think there's an overreaction to the number of starters. There's an overreaction to a true freshman, and several of those games involved fit in both of those categories where teams just played better than expected.
Now, I'm trying to bring this up here because I know that you post a lot of great information over there at wagertalk.com and also on your Twitter feed at CalSportsLV. And I'm kind of looking at it here, and I'm sort of wondering if maybe those teams that didn't return a lot of starters, have newer coaching staffs where maybe they're recruiting at a higher level. But as I'm looking through here at the teams that didn't return a lot of starters, Texas, they always recruit at a high level anyway. Buffalo was playing FCS Robert Morris. Navy was playing Holy Cross. UAB, they almost lost that game outright as nearly a 40-point favorite. Kentucky, their recruiting's been roughly the same. Washington, same thing for them. Boston College, same thing. So it's not even like you've got a second or a third-year head coach that's getting rid of the previous coach's recruits. It was just one of those things where those teams just happened to play well.
They did. And I think, again, we're seeing more public money coming into Vegas because of the expanded betting. This is the first year where we now have all these multiple states with college football. Well, just because people are betting in New Jersey and now they're betting in Oregon and they're betting in Iowa and they're betting in these states, those things trickle over to us, and the lines are affected by, I think we're seeing more public moves than we have in the past. So it's just something we have to keep an eye on. One thing that I certainly, need to look more at now is your recruiting. And, I started to do a new power rating with how teams have recruited for the past 2 years. Yes, you may play a few freshmen this year, and yes, there's going to be a handful of freshmen, true freshmen, that are an integral part of the game immediately. But looking back at what your recruiting class was last year to see where those kids are and using that to up and down my power rating a little bit moving forward.
Now, speaking of power ratings, did you make any significant adjustments from week 1 to week 2?
Yeah, I made Tennessee. I took Tennessee down 5, and I put Georgia State up 4. If you followed me on Twitter on Saturday, I turned that game on at halftime. And I said, I've only been watching this game for 7 minutes of game time, but Georgia State's the better team on the field. Rarely week 1 will I make that strong of a move unless I've watched the game. When you saw Tennessee just being disgruntled, when you saw Georgia State, I think they were 8 of 13 or 9 of 13 on third down conversions. That's not a fluke win. Listen, Purdue going to Nevada, you had 470 passing yards. You were minus 5 turnovers. That is a team that should have won the game but got upset. Watching Georgia State, despite them being a 24-point dog, they were the better team on the field. I have no problems making a 5 downgrade on Tennessee. The other teams that I moved down 3 were Arizona, Western Kentucky. We talked about getting upset. UAB, you talked about. USC, a little for the loss and an extra point for the quarterback change. Again, USC is a situation where Sears transferred out 5 days ago. Had he stuck around another week, boom, he would have been the starting quarterback at USC. Now that he transferred, you're going to who would have been the third string. And Virginia Tech is one of my most disappointing teams. Virginia Tech and Florida State are the teams that, in my mind, I had ranked higher than most. And perhaps I was just a little zealous in my power ratings on them. But watching both of them play, BT played much better in the second half, but they got mauled over in the first half with 10 returning starters on defense and Bud Foster retiring, and this is his last season. It was just baffling to me how bad they played. So those are my biggest changes after week 1.
Now, what goes into that process for you? I talked about it yesterday on the show where, I compare to the closing line, then I go through, do a lot of box score study, and then dig like hell to find injury information because it can be tough in college football sometimes. Is that the process that you go through as well?
It is. And, I just want to give a shout out to the NCAA. If you go to the NCAA.org and look at football and then look at their scoreboard, they do decent recaps of games, and often they tell you they were without their top 2 wide receivers or they missed some offensive linemen in this game. So if you want a quick, easy source to look at scores, I know they don't have lines, obviously, but their write-ups are a little bit different where it's not the ESPN write-up, and they do list some players in there, which is quite helpful. But moving forward, absolutely. Like I said, it has to – for me to move a team 4 or 5 the first few weeks, I have to have watched that game and know that they passed my eye test. And simply, I don't care what the score ends up being. If I have Tennessee and Georgia State are both equal on the teams, I'm going to make a 5-point adjustment. But when I do, I look at what the line was, I look at what the score was, I look at what the yards were, I look at what the turnovers were. And then basically, after reading the recap, if nothing stuck out to me, I make my adjustment. So, weeks 1 and 2, I normally limit them at 3 up or 3 down, just because anything can happen early. Teams may have not as gelled as quick, and situations happen. Once I get past that and I'm watching games more and I see what happens, I can move a team up to 5 points.
See, it's interesting. I mean, I wasn't too aggressive with my moves. My biggest move was USC down 4 points, largely because of the JT Daniels injury. I didn't move anybody else more than 2.5. So I guess it's sort of kind of that push and pull of you want to make sure that you're adjusting to what you see and what you see in week 1, but also not trying to get rid of all that work you did over the summer.
Agreed. Like I said, and the other thing is, I know a lot of people are, if you move one up 3, you move them down 3. I started this segment by saying I moved Tennessee down 5 and I moved Georgia State up 4, because you have to still put in your mind, did Tennessee look past Georgia State? Well, yes, Georgia State was impressive on the field and they beat them and they manhandled them, but there's still that difference with me that Tennessee has that mentality that they lost. So I'm not one that believes the up has to equal the down. I evaluate each team separately inside the game itself when I'm doing the power ratings for the game.
All right, so I do want to go off script for a second here. I did send you over 3 games I wanted to talk about, but I've had listener requests for a bunch of games this week. I'll try to fit all of them in as time permits here on the show, but we might as well start with game 301, 302 here on Friday, Wake Forest and Rice. Wake Forest, 17.5-point road favorite, going down to Houston for this one. When you talk about impressive week 1 performances, I don't think there's one as stunning as that Rice defense against Army, so I presume you upgraded them a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. They were a 3-point upgrade. Now I will say this. I don't know if Army looked past Rice with Michigan on deck, but, I've mentioned this numerous times on the show. The option, no matter who's running it, takes time to get progressed during the season. You look at those good Navy years. You look at, especially, Navy when they were good for those 4 or 5 years. You look at what their rushing was the first 6 weeks of the season compared to the last 6 weeks. The offensive line has to gel. The timing has to get down with the quarterback and the pitches. The O-line the running backs have to be in sync with the O-line, when to cut, how they're going to block. And always, 9 out of 10 times, 99 out of 100 times, an option team, as long as they're healthy, will have much better stats in the end of the year than the beginning. With that said, Wake Forest was a team that, went back and forth against Utah State. You can say their defense looked bad, but again, they were going against one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Jordan Love. I think, despite Rice being 6-1 when they're getting 20 points or more, I still lean with Wake in this game. I think Wake's taken it to a new level. Clawson's offense is something that Rice, I don't think, can keep up with scoring. And I think that Wake Forest is a situation that I'm going to be backing this week. I don't know if they'll make my card, but I certainly have a lean this early in the week on them.
Yeah, and this is one of those situations, too, where, again, context matters so much, especially early on in the year. As you mentioned, it takes time for that option to come together. Maybe Rice benefited from that. I certainly don't want to take all the credit away from them, and neither do you. But also here, that was a game against Army with Army had what? I think 2 possessions of almost 10 minutes. So we didn't get to see just how bad that Rice offense can be. This is a game where maybe we find that out. So that's an important thing here, too, is that when you look at these games with these big time of possession differences or something like that, maybe Rice's better unit is the defense, and they were out there most of that game. Maybe Rice's offense is terrible. Their offense is going to have to be out there here this week against Wake Forest, and as you just mentioned, they may not be able to keep up. So you've got to apply context in that regard, too, as you study the box scores.
Yeah, and the thing to remember as well is time of possession is one thing, but Army only ran 44 plays last week. Wake Forest is going to seem like the fastest team in football compared to a defense that was only on the field for 44 plays last week. So you also have to throw tempo into that, where you had a very rested Rice. Yes, Rice was on the field for 38 minutes, but when you're on the field, and I don't know the 38 minutes just off the top of my head, I'm just guesstimating some amount of time. When you're on the field for almost 66% of the time, but you're only on the field for 44 plays, that is so much different than a Florida State defense that was on the field 66% of the time, and I think was on the field for 108 plays. So put Florida State's defense on the field for 108 plays, put Rice's defense on the field for 44 plays, you're going to have a bit of tiredness level between those two.
Yeah, Rice was on the field 34-51 in that game. They had 8 passing attempts, 56 rushing attempts for 231 yards. So, again, as you said, Wake Forest is going to play with a much, much quicker tempo. So that'll definitely be one to keep an eye on there. And I agree with you. I think if I had to do anything, I'd look for Wake Forest to have some fun offensively. And not to get off on a tangent or anything, but I was surprised with Utah State. I really thought Gary Anderson would neuter that offense, would take it out of the hands of Jordan Love, and he really didn't. I have to give him credit for that. I did upgrade Utah State as a result, may continue to upgrade them as we go forward here, because I expected Gary Anderson, kind of an old school, I want to run the football sort of dude, to kind of ruin that Utah State offense, but at least for 1 week here so far, he didn't do that.
Well, to be honest, how many options did he really have? The team returned 2 offensive starters, Jordan Love and their left tackle. So if you have maybe the best player in the Mountain West back and no one else on offense, I think your hands are pretty much tied what you can do with that team. Now, they proved that, again, another situation where 2 offensive starters, yet they went wire to wire with Wake Forest and were in that game. So, again, times have changed, and people have to look at returning production, I think, as much as returning starters.
All right, so let's go to Saturday here, and this is another one by listener request, although I happened to send this one to you last night anyway. Game 313-314, Vanderbilt and Purdue. Purdue, 7.5-point favorite, pretty much market wide for this one, down from the 9.5 range where it opened. So you agree with this line move here, Rolf?
I do. I have it power rated at 6. So obviously, it's closer to my number. I will say this. I looked up what teams do, what favorites do after losing by a touchdown more favorite, and then they're at home the next week. And those teams that lost as a favorite or more and then at home since 2000 are only 5-16 against the spread, 24%. Purdue fits in that range. Tennessee fits in that range. So I think a lot of times people say, well, my gosh, this team lost as a big favorite. Now they're a favorite again. There's no way they can lose again. And I think you get an overreaction. Well, we haven't quite seen that in this line, but, Purdue blew 2 17-point leads. They've got a lot of pressure on them with TCU on deck. Their DC was up in the press box for the first time. I don't know if you will, after Nevada had 2 90-yard fourth-quarter TD drives. And Vanderbilt impressed me. I mean, their defense kept in with Georgia. Yes, they got beat handily, but I think this Vandy team is going to be able to move the ball on Purdue. You have your quarterback, Riley Neal, who's coming back to his home state. Obviously, he's a grad transfer from Ball State. You have your running back, Keyshawn Vaughn. He had 180 yards for Illinois against Purdue before he transferred here, and he's going to be playing. So he knows he's had success in that. You have Purdue that was 0-4 as a home favorite last year. I am not decided what team I like, but talking it through, I have many more check marks towards the Vanderbilt side than I do the Purdue side.
I've got this one lined 8.5. I did adjust Purdue down a little bit after last week because, look, I mean, that's not a game you're supposed to lose. And I understand that maybe it was in fluky fashion, but you had that lead. You had that game in hand. That's a bad look for Jeff Brom and especially Nick Holtz. So, Nick Holtz, a guy that I do really, really love, and he just hasn't performed well at Purdue. Last year they regressed. This year it seems like, who knows, maybe they'll regress a little bit more. But, Vanderbilt they're such a tough team to figure out because they're outgunned in every conference game. They just are. They just don't have the same talent, except for when they play Kentucky. They just don't really have the same talent as all the other teams in the East, and certainly not the teams in the West. They have no home field advantage to speak of whatsoever. But when they leave the SEC and when they go out on the road, and most of their home games feel like road games anyway, I think you got to give them some respect, because they do play pretty competitively in the SEC. I think Derek Mason doesn't get enough credit for the job that he does there at a place where it's very, very tough to recruit because Vanderbilt has high academic standards. I give Vanderbilt a lot of respect just naturally when they go on the road and play non-conference games. So even though I'm at 8.5, even if this line keeps coming down, I don't think I'm interested in going against Vandy.
Yeah, well, again, that's a situation where Franklin ruined it for all the next head coaches, doing what he did, turning that program around. Jumping back to you downgrading Purdue, I dropped them down a little bit, but, when I look at a team that had a 519 to 404 yard edge, the reason they lost is simple. You were -5 turnovers. I tweeted out last week, Hawaii won the game. Hawaii had 6 turnovers week 1 against Arizona, and they won the game. If you have 5 or more turnovers, you've won 1.8% of the games, in the last 30 years. So when you're -5, that's the reason you lost the game, plain and simple. Turnovers is something that normally doesn't carry over. Yes, a team can start to get into bad habits, and yes, they can have a running back that turns the ball over. But I downgrade a team quite a bit less when it's a turnover situation. I mean, Sindelar did have 2 picks, so that's something you have to look at with the quarterback. But again, just a different opinion when it's a turnover game like that game was.
Yeah, I only downgraded Purdue a point, and maybe I underestimated the difference from Blau to Sindelar because Sindelar played almost all of 2017. So this isn't a guy who's coming out there with no experience. He threw for a lot of yards, made some bad decisions. We'll see. I mean, Purdue was maybe a team I was a little bit high on coming into the season just because I like Brom and Holt. So maybe I'm trying to correct to the market now. But again, a team to watch very closely here as we go forward because those middle-of-the-road teams generally tend to be the ones with the most value if you can pinpoint when they're going to play well, play poorly, or if you can pinpoint ahead of the market whether they're going to drop off or get better. So we'll see how things play out with Purdue as we go forward here. But let's go to game 369, 370. We had some signature games in week 1. I think this is the only one of week 2. LSU and Texas. LSU from a 4.5-point favorite to now a 5.5-point favorite going to Austin.
Again, we have an overreaction from everyone seeing, Texas is so bereft at running back depth. They lost another running back. Their second-string running back is going to be someone who was a quarterback. Their third-string running back is going to be someone that was a wide receiver. But no matter how much I like LSU, and I do like LSU a lot this year, and I've talked on the show that if they were hosting Alabama this year instead of going to Bama, I would have bet them to win the SEC just as a long shot. I think they have a defense that's going to withstand, be one of the best in the SEC. I think their offense is going to be exciting. But again, I simply can't. There's very few times where an angle is going to stop me from betting a game. But Tom Herman as a dog is going to stop me from betting LSU. 8-2 as a dog at Texas, 13-2 as a head coach of Houston and Texas. It goes back to, I think, 21-2 back at the Ohio State and Iowa State days when Tom Herman's a dog on the team. They're 21-2. So, yes, that is going to stop me. You know, I did mark that I like the over in this game. With the running back, with the running back issues, Ellinger is going to have to take control and pass the ball. I know LSU is going to press the pace and pass the ball. I know LSU is going to run 88 to 90 plays even more. I know that forces the other team most likely to press the tempo. I think with the total at 55, it's going to be one of my top plays this weekend.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, look, it's hard enough to run on LSU when you're healthy, let alone when you're not. So you are better off with Ellinger, who's also a mobile quarterback in his own right, can extend some plays, maybe get a few yards as opposed to, some of those negative plays, stuff like that. So could make things a little bit easier for Texas on third down, third and long type situations. Look, my number was 4 on this game. I'm not necessarily surprised to see it moving away from my number. I won't take either side in this one, though. Again, as you mentioned, you really have to respect what Tom Herman has done as a dog. The thing of it is, how good is Texas? I mean, last year they had Oklahoma on the ropes in the Big 12 title game. They beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, a game that Georgia really had no interest in being in. What is Texas? I think we find out this week. And one thing I will say, and I saw somebody I very much respect talking about this on Twitter, if you are high on LSU, go ahead and take them to make the college football playoff or win the college football playoff before this game. Because if they win this game, get that top 10, top 15 type of win on the road, no less, that really strengthens their playoff resume. Even with a loss to Alabama, they could still find their way into the college football playoff discussion, depending on what else happens nationally. So if you're really high on LSU, now's the time to get that playoff price because it's gone if they win this game.
You could probably say that for both teams.
That's true.
Because Texas,
you're right.
Texas could be the exact same situation. Yes, you have Oklahoma, and yes, you may have Oklahoma twice, but hey, if you win this game and you lose to Oklahoma, then you're the one that may have revenge in the Big 12 championship. So hey, it may be one that you want to take a flyer on either side.
All right, so let's go to game 383, 384 here in the ACC, Miami and North Carolina. And this is a hard one for me. You've got the line 6 out there in the market right now with Miami, a road favorite in Chapel Hill. Look, you can say North Carolina won the game. You can say South Carolina gave the game away. Now we kind of find out why Jake Bentley was so bad in the fourth quarter, playing on a broken foot. Credit to North Carolina, credit to Jay Bateman, credit to Sam Howell, the freshman quarterback. Then you've got a Miami team that hasn't played in 2 weeks. So what do we do with Miami here? Because I don't know what they're going to look like. You get so excited to get back to playing. You do all that preparing. You lose a close game to Florida that maybe you should have won. They didn't have to sit on it for 2 weeks. So how do you break this one down, Rolf?
Well, I understand Bentley was hurt, but you still had a true freshman quarterback against a South Carolina defense who put up 2 90-yard drives in the second half. Hats off to them. I saw the North Carolina's O-line better than South Carolina's D-line. I saw North Carolina's D-line better than South Carolina's O-line. I mean, North Carolina had 3 sacks. They had 7 TFLs. And their defense is very experienced. I mean, last year the defense was just on the field so much that they just got run over late. But this defense for North Carolina returns 9 upperclassmen and plays 2 sophomores. So to me, I have North Carolina up quite a bit. Then I look at Miami. I was on Miami week 1. Yes, their defense impressed me. Yes, their offense didn't. Miami was still Miami, though. 14 penalties, 118 yards. Going through the early look at this game, I am looking at the under. You have North Carolina. You have a total of 49 right now. You have a North Carolina team that ran the ball 52 times and passed 24 against South Carolina. And, I think it's a situation where you're now at home. You are excited. All the students picked up their tickets. Last year, only in the opener did all their students pick up all their tickets for the game. The alum are buying tickets. Mac Brown has brought back excitement. Obviously, a win against South Carolina changes all that. Right now, North Carolina is looking at, wow, we beat South Carolina, we beat North Carolina, and then we go to Wake, and then we have App. We could be 4-0 against Clemson. But this team has talent. I give them credit. They returned 14 starters, 7 on both sides of the ball. Des Newsome, to me, could be an all-ACC wide receiver with Sam Howell throwing to him. You had multiple guys rush for 70-plus yards, including Javonte Williams for 100-plus. I think North Carolina can grind the ball against anyone right now. I think Miami showed us that they can stop the ball, and they're going to still struggle with a young quarterback on offense. And, again, I hate to give another opinion on a total and not a side, but I certainly have a couple unders marked on this game as I continue to do work this week.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And we thought this North Carolina defense would get better under a guy like Jay Bateman, and it did, and it has, and it should continue to as this season goes along. And look, the chief problem with Larry Fedora was he couldn't win games and his team couldn't stay healthy. He's a very good recruiter. He has been at every single stop he's been at. So, yeah, this is a North Carolina team that has talent, and they do opt to go the true freshman route at quarterback. And, hey, obviously they think that he's the kid for them, and nobody over the last couple of years at the quarterback position, showed that he was worth holding on to the job. So I agree with you, though. I think the under is the way to go here in this game. And, it does kind of make you think about laying the big number with Miami. Do you want to do that in a game that you expect to be low scoring? And you always want to factor these things into the equation. If you're looking at a low scoring game, naturally your inclination should be to look at the dog. If you're looking at a higher scoring game, then it doesn't necessarily matter as much. So something for our listeners to keep in mind here as we head into week 2.
Adam, one more note on this game, and more often than not, people think about it week 4, but that first conference game, you are really playing closer to the vest than you would if you were playing a non-conference foe. So with this being their conference opener, you don't want to have those young quarterbacks make the mistakes. The game has twice the value as it does in other games. You want to run the ball. You want to be a bit more conservative. You're not going to do those fake punts that you might have done as a big dog against a non-conference foe. Like we saw Miami, couple gambling plays. So to me, with it being the ACC opener for both, it adds a little more credence to that under.
I guess that's one other good point to ask you about, and then we'll talk NFL for a couple of minutes to finish up here. We had some ACC games last week. We had Boston College and Virginia Tech. We had Virginia and Pitt. We had Georgia Tech and Clemson. Then we had Georgia and Vanderbilt. Those were your conference games last week. Those teams now go out of conference. And I was looking, for example, William and Mary in Virginia on Friday night, no less. William and Mary getting 34.5 at 5 dimes, the only book with that number posted. I don't see how I could ever take Virginia in that spot. You look at a team coming off of a conference game, going and playing an FCS opponent. That's a really, really challenging spot to be in. Georgia's laying 49 against Murray State. They may just overwhelm Murray State, but that's kind of intriguing here. Some of these teams that play these conference games or maybe play a really good FBS game like Louisville and Notre Dame. Louisville hosts Eastern Kentucky on Saturday. Very quick turnaround for them. There's some tough situational spots this week for teams that played conference or FBS opponents last week.
Well, you add in that the Virginia offense, yes, they looked good on paper scoring 30 points, but they only had 310 yards, and they only rushed the ball for 3.9 yards per carry. William and Mary, a pretty good FCS team, and most importantly for Virginia is, yes, it's your season, it's your home opener, but you have Florida State on deck. So it's very rare to have this big of a sandwich game week 2 of the season when you are in an ACC sandwich. Again, not an occurrence that happens very often. The ACC and the SEC schedule a couple games early. So normally, when you get to November and the SEC is playing the SoCon, everyone talks about those sandwich games. Oh my God, they're in an SEC sandwich against a SoCon team. There's no way they're gonna cover this game. But people don't talk about it now when it's week 2, when they should, because it's just as important and it's bigger. It's probably a bigger sandwich game because Virginia knows, boom, we got a conference win already. Florida State lost to Boise. It's a great time to play, and we got another opportunity to win a conference game next week. And then you talk about Virginia's situation. After Florida State, they host Old Dominion with a road game at Notre Dame on deck. So you're going to have a sandwich spot and then another sandwich spot in 2 weeks for the Cavaliers.
And very important to be looking for these. We got a handful of conference games here again this weekend as well. So keep that in mind as we head into week 3. But Rolf, we'll finish up on the NFL side of things here today. The NFL, of course, begins on Thursday night. Packers versus Bears. Whole menu of options Sunday. 2 Monday night games. Houston, New Orleans, Denver, Oakland. So in terms of the NFL here, look, I mean, we saw a lot of teams in the preseason not play anybody. Are you shying away from playing those teams that didn't really get their work in the exhibition period?
No, I think the Rams proved it with McVay last year that no matter who you play, listen, the teams actually got more work this year than any other year. Why? Because there were so many scrimmages between the teams. Listen, I've done preseason for, 20 years at North Coast Sports and followed it very closely. Never before this year do I remember teams scrimmaging each other before week number 1. You might have one scrimmage against one team before week number 2 or week number 3. There were some teams that scrimmaged multiple teams before week 1, multiple teams before week 2, and then another team before week 3. Every player, every coach, and every GM will tell you, when I can watch my ones go against their ones in a scrimmage that I'm controlling, I get so much more out of it than a preseason game. So no, don't worry about preseason at all. I don't think it affects one thing.
And as we look at week 1 here, I mean, these lines have been up since, I believe, mid-May. I think CG Technology came out with really all the weeks in mid-May, weeks 1 through 16, or weeks 2 through 16. I think week 1 had already been up, but these have been up forever. We're starting to see some movement out there now. Now that limits have increased on game week, we're starting to see some of the deeper pocketed individuals or groups out there starting to whack away at this marketplace a little bit. But what's Rolf Michaels' approach to week 1, knowing that these lines have been out there for upwards of 4 months?
I'm pretty conservative in the NFL week 1, just like I am in college. And no matter what you think and no matter what you've studied, the players on the field still are don't always come out the way you think they're going to. So I am one that I think I'm better taking what teams have done and the reactions and betting on teams after I see them live. So there's a few games I like. There are a couple situations, Adam, that, if you guys aren't following me on Twitter, these are all things that I tweeted out this week, just FYI, at CalSportsLV. I do want to remind our listeners or tell our listeners that week 1, division dogs are 17-4-1 against the spread. That's a pretty strong number. Why? Well, you look at so many people have power ratings from the preseason moving forward, and teams get adjusted. And, most people have the mentality that almost everyone gets better. This team is up this much and this team is up and this team improves, and very few teams go down in the preseason. But when you talk about division games week 1, you have to tighten those parameters. You have to tighten those lines from your power ratings. These teams play each other twice. They're a little more conservative, just much like a conference game. So week 1 division dogs, 17-4 against the spread. And then I wanted to look at how teams do when you're on the road and you had 4 or 5 wins last year. So you were a poor team. You were either 4-12 or 5-11. Week 1, if you're on the road, those teams have gone 14-3-1 against the spread. Those teams this year are San Francisco and the New York Giants. If you look at the opposite spectrum, teams last year that finished with 9, 10, or 11 regular season wins on the road week 1, you're 13, 23, and 2 against the spread. Those teams, Tennessee, Pittsburgh, Indy, Baltimore, and Houston. So again, not a reason just to play on these teams, but it just shows you the overreaction. We know from top to bottom the NFL is maybe a 17-point league. When you're talking from 4 wins to 9 wins, that's only a 2-game difference where a turnover here or a special teams touchdown could have changed the way. So those teams are much closer than people think. 4 and 5 wins, 14-3 against the spread. Teams that went 9, 10, or 11 wins, 13, 23-2 in week number 1.
Excellent insight, as always, here from Rolf Michaels, professional handicapper over at WagerTalk.com. Rolf, what's going on over there at WagerTalk right now?
Well, again, for those that don't know, WagerTalk has now acquired the Gold Sheet. We now own the Gold Sheet. We've got a special there at WagerTalk.com. And while we bought the Gold Sheet, everything is the same as last year. Bruce Marshall is still writing. Gary Olson's still writing. Everyone that wrote for him last year, complete continuity just under our umbrella now. Baseball, we're not talking baseball, but I still do the daily first pitch. There's a lot of value, and perhaps some people say there's more value in baseball when football starts because they're not looking at those lines so close. And starting next week in college football on Monday, I'll bring back the Gridiron Guide. It's a 1-page sheet on each team. It gives you the game-by-game logs, gives you ATS and over-under records in multiple categories for both teams going back each of the last 3 years. And then, again, there's a lot of stuff on Twitter at CalSportsLV that you want to make sure you stay tuned to.
For sure. Rolf is one of the best resources here in this business. Lots of great free information. Of course, premium picks over at WagerTalk.com as well. And this very segment right here on Bang the Book Radio. So, Rolf, really appreciate your time and insight as always. Thank you so much, man, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks, Adam.